Welcome, all pregnant families, midwives or birth workers. This is Tracy Anderson Askew, your host for the Transform Your Birth podcast, changing your mind about birth one story at a time. Each week we will be exploring a birth story through the lens of what birth can teach us. I'll be digging deep into each story so you can learn what it is that can change the way a birth unfolds. We can't control birth, but we can influence it. So listen in to find out how. Enjoy. I'm so excited to bring you Catherine Bell, the developer of the birth mapping process. Decision-making during pregnancy and birth will have the most profound and significant influence on how your birth unfolds. The biggest mistake people make during pregnancy and birth is completely handing over the decision-making process to their carers. Your job is to step up, understand the landscape, and decide what your needs are in any given situation from pregnancy, birth, and after the baby arrives. There are many potential things that can happen by mapping your chosen options. You are more likely to be able to adapt to the many paths that this experience can take a birthing family. Catherine will help us to understand how to do this through her PhD research on birth mapping. She also brings to us some of the recommendations from the recent release of the New South Wales Birth Trauma Report. From Catherine's research, she can see that this process can contribute to the prevention of birth trauma. This is a must-listen-to episode for all pregnant women. You'll find Catherine's contact details in the show notes below this episode. Enjoy.
Before we begin, a note from our sponsor. This episode has been brought to you by Transform Parenting, an organisation that provides courses, coaching and community from pregnancy through to the first 7 years of a child's life. Most of the stories you will hear through this podcast are graduates of the Transform Your Birth workshop held in Canberra. Our Transform Your Birth Today course is now available to anyone, anywhere, at any time, and includes all the wonderful wisdom of this course and live weekly catch-ups when you need it with our host, Tracy. For a little taste, please accept our pregnancy gift offer, which contains free the first few lessons and some essential wisdom for pregnancy. The link can be found in these show notes or visit transformyourbirth.com.au. And now for the episode.
Well, hello everyone. Another week of the Transform Your Birth podcast. With me today is a dear friend, colleague, and a woman I've known and watched emerge for many, many years, and that's the lovely Catherine Bell. Now, Catherine, you can see her bio in the show notes, but Catherine is a person really worth listening to because she's really helping us with one of the biggest challenges that we have these days, which is around decision-making and navigating the maternity system, because there's increasing rates of intervention. They're not necessarily leading to better outcomes for women. Often when women and their families make decisions, they make decisions without really understanding the true repercussions of what they're actually deciding. And sometimes we don't even look at the flip side of the coin, which is the risks of waiting rather than intervening. So this is really tricky, and I can always appreciate how hard it is to make decisions around this, because nobody ever wants to play Russian roulette with their babies. So having someone like Catherine who can help us navigate this using her methodology, which is the birth map. And I'd like to welcome Catherine now. Thank you, darling, for coming on.
Oh, thanks for having me, Tracy. Very exciting.
Yeah, you got a lot of things going on. So I like to start with the personal. Tell me a little bit about your background, Catherine, and how you got to be following this path.
It's a crazy way how you end up where you end up.
It's
never easy to predict, just like birth. And so for me, I started in marine biology. 14-year-old Catherine was going to chase whales around, the ocean. Big adventurous thing was going to happen. And I did all that. I went to Antarctica, I ticked all the boxes, and I was about to do a PhD chasing killer whales around the Aleutian Island chain in Alaska when my biological clock said, do you know what? Or and the babies won, because something in my being said, you can always come back to a PhD, but you might not get another chance at babies. wait till 35, maybe not going to happen. And it was probably a wise decision because it actually took me 3 years to achieve my first pregnancy. So I probably could have finished that PhD, but brain was not focused. It was all about the babies. And so my matrescence really began when I was about 25, and that biological clock started saying, we've got other plans for you, Catherine. I know you like whales, but there's another mammal that's really, really cool. And in becoming a mum, my focus did shift from marine mammals into the human mammal. And my scientific brain started thinking about my experience as becoming a mum. And we didn't know the word matrescence then. We weren't given that bit of information. And here I was learning as I like making it up effectively as I went along, like this need to know basis. And it was like a secret club. Nobody was gathering the new mums around saying, hey, this is information you need. I've got this great bit of juicy detail for you, and here's some support to go with it. And that kind of I think I felt like there was going to be a club, and like, I don't know, somewhere I thought I was suddenly going to become really good at keeping my house clean in becoming a mum. Yeah, it turns out if you're no good at housework before motherhood, it's going to stay the same. It just gets more chaotic.
I relate to that.
Embrace the chaos.
Yeah.
So in becoming a mum the first time, I had a really positive experience because my mum had a positive experience. And so I grew up hearing birth is just what women do. It's what our bodies do. It's no big deal. Labor is sort of just like a heavy period pain. Like mum never made it sound terrible. And she actually made it sound wonderful. So I went into birth excited, relaxed. And so that first birth was 5 hours. And it was brilliant. And I don't remember it being painful or difficult. I was laughing between contractions. It was marvelous. It was absolutely this, marvelous thing that I did. But then there was the medical thing that happened, which was, despite my marvelousness, the medical system decided they needed to intervene after my baby was born, and there was an unnecessary transfer to NICU because my baby was small and pale. Turns out she's just a redhead with a fine build, but she didn't quite fit the narrow sort of allowance of what babies should be. And this was where I started to hear the word should over and over again. Babies should be doing this. You should put your baby on a separate sleeping space. You should breastfeed like this. You should do this. And then, of course, being the kind of person I am, I went, oh, really? Should I? I've got questions. And so I started asking questions. And the more questions I asked, the more dissatisfied I got, the more frustrated I got. The answers were not forthcoming. So by the time my second was born, a super transformation had happened. Like, you can forget whales completely now. Any thought of going back to marine biology was now gone. It was all about breastfeeding and birth. It was around the time I was pregnant with my second that I discovered doulas. And this term doula was, very new around the traps at that time. And I supported a friend, mother to mother support. I thought I'd had a good first birth. I can be a good support person. And in supporting her, she had a long, over 24-hour birth. In supporting her, I realized there's a lot more to this caper, particularly when the birth becomes medicalized, which if you go into the hospital, it's going to become medicalized. The longer you're there, the more interventions are likely to happen. And that's where more questions came to be. So after my second baby was born, I did doula training, which was an online course mentored with a local doula in Canberra. And that was like an awakening. And around the same time that I did that training, I did the Australian Breastfeeding Association educator and counselling training. And this was like being given the secrets. This was the birthright information. This was the information every single woman should have had all her life from girlhood. This should just be known. Like this was, how do we not know this? How are we not taught this in school? It's like crazy. So of course, once I knew it, I had to tell everybody, like you've got to know this. So that's when I started documenting all of the questions that I wanted to ask. And it sort of started out as a birth plan, like a template, which through the doula training, we'd been given a form that you could fill out that was a good guide for getting ready for birth. They called it a birth plan. But it wasn't comprehensive enough. So I kept adding bits to it and adding more bits and asking more questions. And then I accidentally wrote the book. The birth map was then emerging. So the book initially wasn't called a map. And it was just a multi-staged plan. Like it was the most comprehensive plan. There were backup plans for backup plans, and it was complicated, and the language was clunky. And I found that in my third birth, when I was testing the concept, I kept coming up against blockages, and it was the word plan. The word plan was a real barrier. And so between baby number 3 and baby number 4, because like any good scientist, you experiment on yourself first. And
you had to keep having children.
That's right. So I'm not done yet. I need another baby. I've still got a learning to do. And so between baby number 3 and baby number 4, when I was starting to work with this multi-plan idea, I was visualizing it on paper, and I thought, oh, that looks like a map. Google birth map. It doesn't exist. I just invented something. This is revolutionary. Shared it on Facebook. A really dodgy drawing that I'd done in the paint program on the computer, shared it, and it was immediately people responded to it with, that just makes total sense. How does this thing not already exist? So I started working on it. The book started to take shape in the form that it is now. And in 2018, I published the birth map, boldly going where no birth plan has gone before. And very cheekily sent it to Hannah Darlin, who I did not know, never met. All I knew that Hannah was a professor in midwifery who was well respected, and we knew who she was as consumers. So I just cheekily sent her my book and said, do you mind taking a look at this and making sure it's okay? She, to her absolute credit, an incredibly busy woman, she read it, gave me some good feedback, and then said, hey, Catherine, there's a PhD in this. It does turn out she does say that to everybody, but I happened to...
You felt special at the time.
I did feel very special. And I happened to have the right background. My next step was a PhD. And at this point, I had just had baby number 4, wasn't quite ready to delve into something so big. So I waited until she was 3. And in the 3 years between the publishing of that rudimentary book and then getting it out there into the world, I started to see women using this concept, and the feedback, the anecdotal feedback was so positive. I'm hearing partners being engaged. I'm hearing mums knowing what to ask. I'm hearing mums saying, when I said yes to an intervention, it was yes, not, oh, if I have to. They knew what they wanted and they went for it. Or if they said no, it was a no. And I know why I'm saying no, and I'm confident in that no. And the care provider was documenting that no with confidence, because it was a no, not a no. And a care provider is really worried when they hear a no that sounds not sure.
So, Catherine,
I'm not so worried about the yes that doesn't sound unsure, though.
Yeah. I just want to come in there to it's just fascinating to hear this story and the evolution of how your work has come about, because I've been a childbirth educator for many years too, over 22 years. And I've watched these things change and emerge. And, the birth plan used to create a little bit of resistance from the caregivers because it's, well, nothing ever goes to plan in birth, so why do one? Then we had this concept called the birth preferences, which I've always labelled as a communication tool, a device to help your carers know who you are and what's important to you. You're now taking this even further, because this is really about, through the process of mapping out potentialities and decisions you might make around that, helps the family, the birthing family, to be so much more clearer about what their options are, what the ground rules are, where they might have to push back against medical advice, and have a capacity to make decisions that I suspect, and you can tell us this with your research, that I suspect leads to better outcomes for both mothers, babies, and a higher level of satisfaction about whatever unfolds on the day, potentially even minimising trauma. Am I on the right track here?
Oh, yes, absolutely. And I'm glad you mentioned the birth preferences, because that was something that came through strongly in the research as well. The word plan, such a problem. So let's call them preferences or even wishes.
Yeah.
The word desire came up a lot in the research as well.
Sounds
All
vain, really, doesn't it?
Yeah, like all these belittling terms, when what they really are decisions. When women are putting something into their birth plan or birth document, when
Yeah.
they are expressing themselves to their care provider, they are saying, this is something that's important to me. This is what you need to know about me, and this is my decision.
Yeah.
Anytime a woman is asked for consent, that's a decision point. And so we really need to start framing it within that language, that consent means you need to make a decision. You have the responsibility. And when we diminish women's power by giving them language such as preferences, it is something that's so easy to dismiss should things become adverse or difficult. And we can easily just defer to the authority of the care provider. But because consent is a legally binding decision, it relieves a care provider of some level of responsibility in the eyes of the law. But in reality, they still have a responsibility to provide good care, not negligent care. So if something does go wrong and the care provider is at fault, with or without consent, there is still repercussion on the care provider if they haven't performed that procedure or that action appropriately. But consent, if you are saying yes to something, you actually need to be what's known as informed consent. And so they use this thing called shared decision making, which is another problematic term which I'm challenging in the literature. It should be called supported maternal decision making, because when we call it shared decision making, it suggests that the decision is shared, not the process to that decision. And in those situations where a care provider might have a lot more pulling a lot more weight, you hear a lot of things like, oh, I've got this, trust me, don't worry, I'll deal with that if that happens. So when a woman says, I'm worried about, say, going overdue, what might that look like? Oh, don't worry, if that happens, we'll talk about it then. And then you've got a high stress discussion happening in the moment where there's limited information, where if we consider induction earlier on in the pregnancy, she can start looking at when she might feel induction is warranted. Is post dates, as in over 40 weeks, which is really not post dates, is that 40-week mark my signpost for induction, or am I more comfortable with 41 weeks? And she needs to put that into her context. because there's no one way. Every woman is different. Every philosophy is different. Her values are different, but her circumstances are different. What is her financial circumstances, her living arrangements? How far does she have to travel just to get to the hospital and back again? What does her support network look like? Does she have to return to work? Does her partner have to return to work? Does she have support? All of these things will influence the decision that she makes. And for some women, an induction for non-medical reasons is influenced by perhaps a fly-in, fly-out partner, or the timing of that birth needing to fall before 42 weeks, because after 42 weeks, she can't birth in that facility anymore. What's the policy that's then driving behind that decision?
I'm glad you've raised the issue of policy, because this is one of the things that can cause people to follow the status quo, or to follow the lead of the carers, because our policy is you've got, say, gestational diabetes, and at 38 weeks we induce. And that type of decision making, which is based on policies, which is hopefully based on up-to-date research, not always, because it can take a while for research to become on the ground being practiced. When it comes to making a decision like that based on a policy and that little piece of the puzzle alone, without taking into account what's actually going on for the pregnancy, how has she managed her sugars, what other factors might influence the way this unfolds, are there any, all of these things need to be looked at in the context of that individual woman. So policies on their own are not a basis for decision making. They are a contributor to a decision making.
And that's and that I want to introduce another word to you and your audience, and that is sense making. Before we get to decisions, we need to make sense of what our options are, and that's where the map comes into play. The map is about putting pathways onto a landscape that we're starting to make sense of. We're starting to consider what the journey might look like. What pathway will I go along if this is the circumstance? So if all is going well, we're going to stay on the no intervention pathway. There's no need to interfere, so we'll just keep going. What do we want to do? Back rubs? Do I want to be touched? Do I want to be alone? The dark room, the smells, all of those physiological aspects that we learn about that we can bring into play. But what if my birth is really long? How will I cope with that? At what point are we going to transfer to the hospital if we've chosen to have a hospital birth? And who is our care provider? Is it fragmented care or midwifery care? Understanding how that will impact the journey as well. So who our companions are on our journey matter. So if we understand that right at the beginning, before we start making our map, we might realize that our current care provider is not the correct one for our journey that we want to undertake. Yeah. So the sooner we have that information, the better we are equipped to be able to align our birth companions, be that our care provider, our support person, the people that we need to be providing us guidance on that journey and support. We need to know who they are earlier. And a lot of women don't realize that there are 11 different models of care. There's a first-time mum is often channeled into standard care because she'll be asked, do you have private health cover or not? And if the answer is no, standard care for you. If the answer is yes, private obstetric care for you. But there are midwifery models within the hospital, such as a birth centre within a hospital. Some places have standalone birth centres. There's also private midwifery, which come November doesn't need to get permission from a GP to be able to be referred to a private midwife.
Yeah.
And a private midwife can be at home or can support you in a hospital birth. And a lot of women don't realise that there's all these layers that you can bring in the right kind of support that you need for that birth. But then, of course, what's your financial situation? Private midwifery is expensive. With public funded home birth, there's often other rules that come into play. So the earlier we know what all of those factors are, the better we are able to align ourselves with our best possible pathway. And that means tuning into ourselves and taking responsibility, because with great responsibility comes great power. And when we can be so like in tune with our own self, we're better equipped to bring in that intuition aspect of the decision making. So the BRAIN acronym, which I know you're familiar with, and many of your listeners are probably familiar with, it's been around for a really long time, and I, for the life of me, cannot find the original instigator of this fabulous tool. But BRAIN tells us the benefits, the risks, the alternatives, intuition, what's my gut say, and then nothing. What happens if we do nothing? That's such an important question. How long can we wait? Is it urgent? Can we defer this decision to a later date? In induction, if we wait another week, are we at risk? Is it just simply because I'm diabetic and geriatric and and it's 40 weeks, you can start to unpack that and say, well, I feel well, the baby's doing well, there's actually no pathological reason right now to bring this baby in unawares. Let's just wait another week and regroup. But should my blood pressure go up, or should some other sign come up, we will reconsider that decision. You've always got a chance to make a new decision to a point. But there will be places where you've gone past the point of no return. So once you say yes to that induction, you're now on a medicalized pathway. The induction will come with the monitoring, will come with a lot more observation, which then might make you more tense. So when we can understand that environment might happen, what can we do to counteract that? We can use the toilet, we can use the bathroom, we can use our smelling of our own smells. There's so many tools at our belt which transform your birth. We'll provide you all that information. But when we know that information, we're better equipped to make those informed decisions when the time comes. We can place ourselves on the map and know the pathways. And it's not just about the decision point. We need to know the path that comes after it. So with an epidural, that is the biggest decision point in this birth map, because the epidural pathway takes us from the physiological birth into a medicalized birth. And in that medicalized birth, that epidural might be about pain relief, but it also comes with a catheter and drips in our arms, and the strap, if we haven't already been monitored, the monitor comes into play. And we are very, very likely to be stuck on the bed. And the reason that we're probably stuck on the bed at that point is because we're also really tired. By that point in the birth, it might have been a long birth. So being realistic about what that scene might look like, who's in that scene, which, is it a random obstetrician or is it our known obstetrician that we're talking to? Are we needing to revisit different aspects of our health? How's our partner in that space? What does that scene look like? And for some women, the epidural signpost means we're getting ready for a cesarean. And so in the birth map, I talk about non-emergency after labor cesareans and then emergency after labor cesareans, because they're two really different scenarios. One is happening because things are urgent and immediate need is arising, and one might be happening because we're thinking, I'm tired, I want this to be completed now, I want to be ready for that cesarean now, rather than waiting for it to become emergent where the outcomes might be less good. We might be more likely to be separated, baby in the NICU, mother in ICU or on the ward. Breastfeeding is going to be impacted. We look down the path. And so for some women, that cesarean starts to look like a good decision compared to waiting for an emergency cesarean or an assisted delivery, which is with the forceps or the vacuum, maybe an episiotomy. So it's
can I just,
it up.
yeah. A lot of this can sound very overwhelming for a pregnant woman
It does,
because it is whole new territory. And what you're inviting women to do is to take on more responsibility for the decision making. And for some, it can feel just a lot easier to travel that path of least resistance and just do what you're told. And in my experience, certainly watching those things unfold, typically when you've had the baby, you're looking over your shoulder and you're going, what the hell just happened? What was all that about? Could I have avoided that? And that process of sort of, I guess, handing over the power and the responsibility to others is fraught in itself and risky too. If you don't bring in the natural intelligence that you have around your baby, your pregnancy, what your body's telling you. So the process of actually rising up to be able to do what you're suggesting, Catherine, is no easy feat. And it requires preparation. It requires education and understanding. And it also is requiring you to have some really good conversations before birthing day around
well before
different, absolutely, these different pathways and what they actually mean, which can be tricky. So if you were to bring your work back to, well, actually, can you tell us a little bit more about what evidence you've brought through with people who are using this? Like, tell us about the upside, and then I'd love you to share some just really good advice for pregnant women who might find this really a bit overwhelming, but to really bring it back to the tin tacks of how they could start to prepare their birth maps.
Yeah, because that was what we just explored there, was really that worst case scenario of a dramatic birth. But the study, as I for the study, the women were given a copy of the book and no instruction, no additional education. The question was, is the book on its own enough to help women prepare? And the beauty of the book is that it's divided into 3 sections. One that talks about decision making and what that actually means. Decisions are more than information. So it gives an overview of, you matter, you are important. This is the story that you're bringing into the decision, and why your decision is your decision as well. So building the confidence in making those decisions. The second chapter of the book is questions, and this is where that overwhelm can become really simple. Because now you know what to ask. We take that big sort of, oh, where do I go from here? And we really just, here's some key questions to ask so that you can work out what is important to you. You can then sit in that scenario, that hypothetical, and ask yourself, which feels like the best pathway for me, so that when that birth is unfolding, you can place yourself on your map and know where your next step is really confidently. And your partner takes this journey with you, and that map helps them to stay focused on where they are as well, and helps reduce their overwhelm.
Can I clarify, the questions you're asking, are they questions of them and their personal ideas around this, or are they questions to ask their carers?
The core of it is the questions to ask the carers. It is so important that you ask your care providers these questions, because if we ask the questions in isolation and just Google it on our own and build the map on our own, we won't get a realistic landscape. We need to know that facility and that care provider. So that's the map that we're building, that landscape around the policies in that facility, what barriers might be in the facility, what is my care provider's skill base? Because if we were to have towards the end of the pregnancy, have a situation where we discover our baby is breech, and we say, I want to have a vaginal breech birth, but our care provider is not skilled. That means we might need to face a transfer And that might look like transferring several hours away from home. So then we need to weigh up what's the most important. Now, is staying home, close to home, more important than achieving a vaginal birth? Because you do not want an unskilled care provider trying to do something out of their comfort zone. So we need to bring in those really realistic aspects. So what are the skills of my care provider? And if I want to have a cesarean, then I definitely want a well-skilled obstetrician. But if I want to have a home birth, I want a midwife. So aligning myself with the right care provider, the right tools for the job, if you like.
Yeah.
And that looks like on different pathways, we might need to shift to a different care provider. And that's where that collaboration is so important. If we do need to shift from our midwifery pathway onto an obstetric pathway because our birth might look like it needs to become a cesarean, or there's a difficulty arising, the right skills for the job. And in the study, the women who did face those difficult births found the birth map very grounding. It gave them a sense of understanding of where they were and what was possible, the questions to ask. So, for example, one mum who wanted home birth found out at her 20-week ultrasound that her baby had a heart condition and she needed to shift into high-risk care. This was heartbreaking in all of the ways for her. And she had to really reevaluate where she was. She thought she would have to let go of any sense of control and submit to the system. But with the birth map, she had questions to ask. And the question that was the most helpful to her was, what will happen if this birth is fast? Because for her, she was now worried that if my baby is born, how urgent does my baby need medical attention? So that question allowed her to ask the cardiologist, what would happen if this birth happens fast and we don't make it into the hospital? And the doctor just said, oh, just get here as quickly as you can. That would not be a problem. And she just went, suddenly she had a much more realistic understanding of what her scenario was and what her options were within that. And she did end up having a fairly fast birth because she did relax as well. But she brought in doula support. She brought in the kind of support that she needed, which in the book, if you've never heard of a doula, the book introduces that concept of a doula and what a doula does. The book also might be the first time you hear about independent childbirth education, and that independent is really important because the childbirth education or the antenatal classes that you might do at the hospital might not give you enough scope, enough tools to draw on. And that independent childbirth education can also tap you into a community. I hear there's one called Transform Your Birth that is incredibly good.
Your plug, Catherine.
And it makes such a difference because the third chapter of the book is called Beyond the Birth. And that postpartum preparation is so critical because it's not just about the birth, it's becoming a mother. There's this whole bit that comes after. And that's where the study was really interesting because women were skipping the third chapter. They'd follow the book through. I've got my handle on the decision. I've got my map now for the birth, and I'll skim that bit, but that'll come easy. So one of the things that's happening out of the study is the book's getting a bit of a makeover. And chapter 3 is becoming chapter 1.
Right.
We are going to start with the destination. We are going to start by considering what is post-birth going to look like. What is our support network? What matters to us? What are our values and philosophies in parenting? What's available to us? Understanding co-sleeping and breastfeeding and not just that first 12 weeks that tends to get focused on as the fourth trimester, but that first year, and then setting it up for that next step and that next step. It's so incredible when we start to untap the fullness of the journey. And in the book, there's a lovely page that says, matrescence, know this word, know what's about to happen, because you will transform. So that's one of the most wonderful things that's come out of the study, is that destination is important. And afterwards, many of the mums said, I wish I'd read that chapter more closely, because once I revisited it after birth, it was like, oh, of course, if I'd put that in space. And a lot of them delayed connecting with a lactation consultant because they did not know it was a thing yet. So that third chapter, read it first, start there.
I love that. You're really talking my language. What lovely Catherine's talking about right now has been the underpinning of the evolution of transformed parenting, because I could see my families were going through this very fractured. We look at pregnancy, and then there's the birth, and you get different people for that, and then you get different people for post-birth support, and then you get your maternal and child health nurse. And yet for the family who are emerging through the birth process, it's one long path, and it's all about when the baby lands and everything that you go through leading up to that point. Whilst it's hard for women to think beyond the birth, it's very common. I'm not surprised you found that in your study, that they can't get their minds beyond the birth. What I notice in the work that I do is that they start to think about that post-birth stuff, because they've now got a game plan for how they're going to approach the birth, and then they've actually opened their mind to where the rubber really hits the road, which is when the baby's born. And transformed parenting has created a pathway for people with the birth process. Then we keep, with the antenatal education or the birth prep, then we stay connected to you. We do 30-minute catch-ups every week to ask questions if things deviate off left field, to coach you, to ask you what the landscape might look like and how to navigate that by asking the right questions. Then the birth, and then we keep connected to our new parents through weekly catch-ups as well. It's all part of the Transform Your Birth course, is that seeing people not just for a weekend workshop or an online experience, but all the way through, because that level of community and connection is vital, because things change the whole way through. So I love that you've really brought that piece together. Now, the other thing that's striking me about your beautiful work, Catherine, is the importance of helping women when they give birth to avoid trauma. Okay, now trauma is in a very small, natural, like very tiny nutshell, is too much, too soon, for too long. And it overwhelms the system. And that mother hasn't been able to adapt or to integrate what's going on around her, because it's just all happened too fast, or she hasn't had some level of agency in there. She's felt helpless. She's felt disrespected. Her voice hasn't been heard. What you're describing is a real antidote to that. So tell us what you know about birth trauma and how this can really help people evade that.
So the idea with the map, it's about prevention.
Yeah.
Let's do as much as we can to prevent trauma. And in the study, we did have one woman who ended up with a cesarean under general anaesthetic, so a suspected placental abruption. And she had worked so hard on her map. She was aiming for a VBAC, so she had, it wasn't her first rodeo, so she had that knowledge of her previous birth, and a lot of that gave her a what I don't want to see happen again bit of it. That's just as useful as what do I want. Yeah. Often starting with what don't I want can be really helpful. And so she had a really good understanding of what her vision for a good birth would look like. She also had a very realistic understanding of what her circumstances were, and finances and support were really limited for her. But towards the end of her pregnancy, she really had, she pooled her resources the best she could and brought in a private midwife to support her in the hospital. And what that did for her was give her that continuity of care from the pregnancy, even though it was only the last couple of weeks of pregnancy when she engaged the midwife, through the birth, and then into the postpartum. But when her birth started to unfold, things started to happen like very suddenly, and she found herself general anesthetic cesarean happening very quickly.
Yeah.
But what she had was a birth map that had said, let's not discount the fact that a cesarean might happen again. And they had a pathway for what that would look like. The only regret she had was she hadn't seriously considered the general anesthetic pathway, but because she had considered a cesarean as a potential emergency, they did have a rhythm ready for that. Her partner knew what that would look like, who would be there, what to ask. And so she said, whilst it was horrible, it was not traumatic. That could have been a really bad experience because it all happened so fast.
Yeah.
And she said, and then what happened afterwards, because she had her private midwife and she also had the birth map that said very clearly, these are my greatest worries. This is what you need to know about me. The obstetrician that performed the cesarean came to her afterwards and checked in with her. They debriefed.
Wow.
And she really said, I know this is not what you wanted. So she was seen and heard.
Wow.
And what a difference that made. And that was able to happen because she was able to say, this is who I am. This is what matters to me. This is what you need to know about me. So the care providers were able to respond to that. And then, of course, having engaged that private midwifery practice, even though it was a stretch to her finances, the recovery, having that midwife coming into her home for 6 weeks was, she said, I could not put a value on that care. Wow. Because it really helped keep us grounded and centered and cared for in the absence of, she didn't have a lot of family. They were new, you know, a lot of women relocating. They haven't built a network around them in their new environment. So tapping into those resources, and the book tells you, here is how you find out what's local in your area. These things do exist. Build your network, ready for that postpartum time. And so that for me, seeing that coming out in the evidence, particularly in light of just yesterday. Today is the 30th of May as we're recording this, but on the 29th of May, the New South Wales Birth Trauma Report was released with 43 recommendations and 5 findings. One of those findings is that, lo and behold, there's no one size fits all.
Oh, really?
Who knew? I know, right?
Wow.
But that's now put there in the findings. There is no one way. We have to consider every woman as an individual and her journey as an individual journey. That's now in there, in the findings. Yes, evidence. We can now action that. And recommendation number 18 is that the New South Wales government makes evidence-based birth plans freely available as a guide. Whew, I wonder who has a really good evidence-based birth plan ready to go. So I've already started some very, very awesome conversations with the key players to make sure that we can action that recommendation and get the birth map into the hands of women. So it's a lot of steps. There's a lot of bureaucracy still involved, but it's happening. And recommendation number 17 is about adequate training to ensure all practicing maternity health practitioners in New South Wales undertake informed consent training. And the Maternity Consumer Network has some informed consent training that they are hoping will be drawn on in that recommendation. The birth map training that I do, or birth cartography training as I call it, cartography being the scientific art of map creation. And it also helps care providers to sit in a more compassionate place when it comes to decision making and see consent as a decision. So in my paper that will come out later this year, you'll see the term supported maternal decision making in place of consent or shared decision making, to really try and shift the mindset when we come to these conversations with women, and bring women into that conversation and say, you are the decision maker and I trust your decision, as opposed to you're the care provider and I trust you. We're now making sure that that woman and her story are center of everything that we do in maternity care.
Wow. Well, good on New South Wales for bringing that out into sharp focus, because that's going to make such a big difference. You know, in my experience working with women who've been traumatized through birth, it's not even necessarily the events that unfold on the day that cause it. It's often the level of care and respect for her voice being heard, and communication to her is often key ingredients that cause women to walk on the land of trauma. So having caregivers who realise the importance of that and who can help more and more women avoid birth trauma is so essential. We've got to put women front and centre in this, because that just makes everything else so much harder on the other side when that baby lands. Yeah,
that's right.
Beautiful. So, Catherine, tell me, we're going to have to wind this up. I think people listening to this podcast need to know a little bit about how to contact you. And maybe if you just finish with just one little bit of gold nugget wisdom that you'd like to leave our listeners with.
Well, you can find me at birthmap.life. And the beauty of birthmap.life is that because I don't think people should be forced to pay for information that they have a right to access, I have a free member access point on my website, and you can read the book in there. And there's a game that you can play. And the game really helps to put that idea of the map into play, where you've got something that's random, the bits you can't control, and then the bits that you can control. And the clever thing about the game is it's based on the statistics in the mother-baby report. So every roll of the dice is actually statistically weighted. I'm pretty proud of the game. But communication is key in all things. Talk to your care provider. And if it's fragmented care, ask the same question of each different care provider until you're satisfied with the answers that you're getting. If you're getting different answers, that means there's flexibility in that space. If you're getting consistent answers, that means there's a tight protocol that if you don't like that answer, you need to work out how you're going to get around that. That potential barrier might mean changing care providers. So ask the most important questions early, and you'll be well equipped to start your individual journey.
Beautiful. Well, thank you. You're just gold. I love the passion you have around this work. And people like Catherine are so important for us to really move beyond some of the statistics showing things like almost 50% of women having caesareans, 50% of first-time mothers being induced, all of these changes, which, you know, have been around a long time now, and they're not leading to better outcomes. So we have to pull back on the way that we're managing birth to really start to make much better decision making. And Catherine's empowered us today to realise that actually it starts with you. And then through that, through what we demand of our system and our care providers, we can help them to learn also the importance of the birthing mother's voice. So I hope you've enjoyed this episode. I think it's an absolute must listen to when it comes to preparing for birth. And you can find Catherine at, what's the website again, Catherine?
Birthmap.life.
I love that, birthmap.life. So tune in again and we'll have some more goodness for you next week. Thanks for listening.
Yeah, and then after I started getting that urge to push, I was just pushing for a long time, and they said, maybe let's try a different position. So in the bath, like I flipped onto my back for a while and onto my side for a while. And yeah, still not a lot was happening. Like she was still just kind of like right there, but not coming out. And we realized I hadn't gone to the toilet in a long time. And so I tried to go to the toilet, but I just could not go to the toilet. She was so low that it was just like blocked, and her bag of waters hadn't broken yet. So I had said to my midwife, if you break the waters, will that help things move along? And she'd said, yes, but you didn't really want any interventions. So, weigh up that option if you want me to do it or not. And so we decided not to. And I ended up getting up to the toilet after pushing in the bath for about 2 hours, 2.5 hours. I went to the toilet and still couldn't go to the toilet, but then the waters just popped on the toilet. So that happened anyway. And then they said, well,
I'll just come in there. The benefit of letting the waters break of their own accord typically means that it can support like the pressure of the uterus shrinking, and then making that area smaller for the baby. As that pressure comes down on the baby, it can then just promote that lovely tuck dive position, so the crown of the head is presenting. So that's typically why they don't like to break waters too early, to promote really good positioning of the baby. But in your case, she did get a little bit malpositioned, didn't she? Is that right?
A little bit, yeah. So the waters broke on the toilet, and then they decided rather than go back into the water, maybe we'd try some positions on the bed. So I got up, while they were getting the bed ready, there was a little bit of a moment of kind of one of those like crisis confidence moments, I guess, because the bed wasn't quite ready and they were getting things ready for like a little quick catheter to empty my bladder.
Yeah.
I was walking over to bed and I was about to have a contraction and I did not know what to do because I was walking and the bed wasn't ready. I'm like, oh, what do I do? And they're like, just squat. So I like squatted and did a few contractions like that. But then I got up on the bed and was like leaning over the back of the bed on my knees, and I was pushing like that for a long time. Excuse me. And it was just a long time, and it got to the point where rather than using my breath to push, they kind of coached me to do like a deep hold breath and push with holding my breath. And I think that was the hardest thing about the whole labor, was holding my breath. Like that need to like breathe in air was so strong. And I probably did that for about half an hour, maybe 45 minutes. And I feel like my head was going to explode because I was like holding my breath so much and pushing.
Yeah.
And I was also always really scared of tearing, and I was really scared of an episiotomy. But in that moment when I was like gasping for air, I was like, I don't even care if I tear right now. I need to push this baby out.
Yeah.
And so I was just pushing with all my might. But she was just crowning and she was just going in and out, in and out. And later on, they discovered that her head was asynclitic. So it was kind of like this, and she had her little hands up like this. So this part of her head was what was coming in and out.
Yeah, that's one of those mysterious things. You can't control that. That can just happen, can't it?
Yeah. So they told me, because I'd been pushing for so long, it was like 3.5 hours by this point. They said they had to get the doctors in to obviously watch what was happening. And the doctor said, look, she's right there. Like she was literally coming in like this far every time.
Yeah.
Then just kind of going back in. And they said, we think if we give you a little episiotomy, she'll come right out. And so I was like, absolutely, let's do it.
It's amazing how your opinion can change so much. Yeah. Did you feel the episiotomy?
Not at all. So I didn't even feel the local. The doctor was really great. She gave me the local and she said, okay, we'll try a couple of pushes first, just in case. And then she cut, and I didn't feel it at all. And her head was born literally like next contraction. Then she did the beautiful like turn on her own, and then her body came out with the next contraction, and she was here, and it was awesome.
Wow. Describe that moment when you met her.
Well, the first thing, it was the most amazing feeling, her coming out, and then I was just like, relief. And then they were like, here's your baby. And I was just like, oh my gosh, she's so beautiful. And she was so warm and gooey. And it was just so good. And immediately the contractions stopped all my nausea that I'd had throughout all of pregnancy stopped. Like pretty much like all the pregnancy symptoms were just like gone like that.
Wow. What a relief.
Yeah.
You had a bit of a post-birth high, is that right?
Oh, yes. So that feeling from when she came out for like the next 48 hours was just like euphoria. Like it was the best feeling in the world. Yeah, I can't really even describe it. Everything was just so amazing. I guess that's just all those hormones just working like they should.
Yeah, that's the goal. Mother Nature wants you to be high and want to have more babies, but also high in order to be able to manage that next phase, because it's very intense. The feeding starts, and that's a whole new experience, and baby's sleeping, and so there's a lot to deal with when baby lands. So you had that lovely hormonal high. How did you go with the placenta? You needed a bit of extra help?
Yeah, so about 45 minutes after I gave birth, like it still hadn't come. Then like it got to an hour and my midwife was doing the pressing to try to get it out, but nothing was working. So got up to the toilet to try to birth it, still wouldn't come out. So had to get the doctor back again. And yeah, she worked on it for about half an hour, 45 minutes herself. She was really like doing all the massage, and she was even like hands in trying to pull it out. And that's again where I use the breathing techniques, and they were doing all the pushing and the pulling. And yeah, so in the end, like I think it was maybe like an hour and a half after birth, it still hadn't come out, even though I'd had the injection to get the like just after she was born, I had the injection because they said with pushing for so long that it's likely to have like a delayed placenta. So
yeah,
I even had the injection and it still wouldn't come out. But yeah, they finally got it out manually. It was pretty dicey. They were almost going to take me to theatre, but she just got it. But just as she got it, that's when I had a bleed. So
right,
I heard her say PPH. And luckily, like I'd done a lot of listening to different podcasts and reading. And so I knew that it meant postpartum hemorrhage, but I also knew I was in like the exact right place. Like I was in the perfect place for it. And my beautiful midwife, Nick, came up and she was so calm and lovely and was like, just letting you know, a couple more people are going to come into the room. It's nothing to worry about, just having a little bit of blood loss. And I was like, I don't care. I've got my baby. I'm happy. Like, do what you need to do.
You were in your hormonal high.
Yeah, I was just like, yeah, it's fine. You do your thing. So they put the cannula in and fix the bleed up. And
yeah, and that's the best thing you can be. That's the best thing you can be, Lauren, is in that hormonal high and falling in love with your baby. Because while you're falling in love with your baby, you're promoting, you're releasing the most oxytocin that you can, and that's the hormone that's going to support the retraction of the uterus and the release of the placenta. So it was good you were in that state. And I think having the skill of your midwives really maintaining that space of calm, not getting caught up about the fact that you're having a bit of a bleed, staying calm, then supports the safety of the whole process and the help that you needed to get that placenta out. That was really
And I always remembered one of the things you said in your course about one of the pregnant ladies who had a car crash, and she just knew to just stay calm so that the blood flow didn't just rush where it didn't need to go. And I was just like, oh, I've got my baby, we're having a cuddle, like they're all looking after me, it's fine.
Yeah, that's right. Oh, fantastic. I'd love to ask Dan what it was like for him when he met the baby. Can you talk for him, because he's dealing with Orla now?
I think he was very relieved because he doesn't do well with blood or things like that. And when he saw her crowning, I think he thought she had died because her head was, how they kind of come out a bit pointy.
Yeah,
he thought, oh my God, she's pointy, like her head's been crushed, but I've got to stay calm for Lauren. So I think when she came out, I think he was finally like really relieved that she was okay.
Yeah, it can be hard for partners because they can see more than, and they're aware of what's going on in the room and the state of the other people, the health professionals around you. They take in a lot more information, whereas mothers are typically, when they're working with the birth, they're off into labour land and they're completely oblivious to a lot of things.
Yeah, I had my eyes closed for like almost the entire time. Like it wasn't until I got the photos back that I was like, oh, is that what everything looked like?
Wow. So what did you learn about yourself?
I think I learned that I will do anything for my baby. So like, yeah, I'll do anything for her. And I think that's why I was like so just really wanting to try to do it without having any pain meds, just because I didn't want anything to affect her.
Yeah.
And I think I also learned like that I was like, this is what I was meant to do. I was meant to be her mum, and yeah.
Life takes on a whole new quality, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's lovely. And is there anything you would say to a pregnant woman preparing for birth? Any sort of gifts of wisdom?
I just say like get your team around you, like get a really good team around you. In my preparation, I read Rhea Dempsey's Birth with Confidence. Yeah. And she talks about the different types of birthing, like willing women, and the different support circles of influence. And at one point in my pregnancy, this before I got into the birth center, I was just in the normal, like the normal birth suites area, and just getting like a different midwife and a different doctor every appointment. And I felt very lost. And when I read that in the book, I was like, okay, I need to find someone to be that person of like continuity.
Yeah.
That's what I remembered you said in your course, that like a student midwife is kind of like a free doula.
Yeah.
And there I reached out and got a student midwife, which was amazing. And yeah, I think getting someone that you know to like help you through is really important. And yeah, I'm just so thankful for my beautiful midwife, Nick, who just like looked after me and knew my wishes, and she was so protective the whole time. There was one point where, because I'd been pushing for so long, I think someone had suggested taking me down the corridor to the suites, and she said, I'm not letting Lauren give birth in the corridor, so like they can come here. And yeah, I'm just forever thankful for her for doing that.
Yeah. Oh, that's lovely. Well, I think Lauren, Dan, and little Orla's story of Orla coming into the world is a beautiful example of what happens when women are safe, loved, and supported. Lauren had the best team she could have had around her, of people who were very invested in her being heard, listened to, and supported her wishes. She had a partner who absolutely nailed it, 100 out of 10 she gives him, and who knew exactly what his role was. And then even though little Orla's head was a little bit malpositioned, they were able to still get through a bit of an episiotomy, which wasn't even a concern. A little bit of a placenta that needed a bit of help to come out and a bit of bleeding, but it doesn't matter what happens. It's the state of mind and the team that a woman has around her can get her through anything. And so Lauren and Dan's story is a beautiful example of, where birth can take us, and the preparation to get into that space, to move beyond fear and really start to believe in yourself, can go a long way to supporting the process of birth. So thank you everyone for listening. And once again, we'll have some more goodness for you next week. Lots of love. See you again. We hope you enjoyed this episode. Please subscribe and share this podcast. This episode has been brought to you by Transform Parenting, an organisation that provides courses, coaching and community from pregnancy through to the first 7 years of a child's life. It is a place where you can learn, get support and grow into your role as a parent. Why not take advantage of a special gift for all pregnant women at transformyourbirth.com.au. Or if you have children, we have a gift for parents also.